Now I can see everyone. Wow. Leo, thanks for the introduction, and it's great to see everyone here today, and thank you for taking time out of your busy lives to be here, because this is a very important event, and Fred Anton really kicked things off. It is, again, it's an honor for me to be here today, but before I get started, I want to go through the full disclosure area. I wear two hats. First and foremost, I am a lifelong private sector business owner, and I'm the owner of several businesses. In total, my various business enterprises employ over 550 people. I've been in the waste and recycling business for over 30 years, and I'm proud to tell you that I'm a garbage man, okay? Second, tomorrow is my 2-year anniversary in the state Senate. April 2nd was the day I was sworn in 2014 after winning a special election on March 18th of 2014 as the first ever write-in candidate to win a write-in campaign in the state of Pennsylvania. Many people in this room were part of the team that sent me to the Pennsylvania State Senate, and thank you very much. I joke with people that I've been in the waste business my entire life because as a kid I would shovel horse manure on my parents' farm and I got paid $5 a week. I think I was somewhere 9 to 11 years old, so I've been in the waste business a long time. I knew from an early age that I wanted to be my own boss, and again, there are many people in the audience who know me, and they would not be shocked to know that I have a tough time taking orders from others, okay? I started my first small business when I was 20 years old, and I never looked back. I've lived the American dream. To be able to start a business at age 20 is incredible. I see, young people in the audience. It's very important. In 1985, I started a waste company called York Waste Disposal, and I sold it to Republic Industries in 1997. On March 1st of 2000, I started my current company, Penn Waste, with 2 trucks. Since March of 2000, Penn Waste has grown significantly, and we project our 2016 revenues to hit $65 million. Penn Waste employs over 360 proud, hardworking people. We service almost 200,000 residential homes in South Central Pennsylvania and over 3,500 commercial customers in South Central Pennsylvania. And we just opened, a year ago, one of the largest recycling facilities in the nation. Early on in my business career, I learned several important lessons. Now, I have a book, it's a leadership book I started 20 years ago, and I have rules and I have lessons. We're going to talk about lessons first. Lesson number 1, to be successful and survive in the private sector business world, it is critical to build and surround yourself with a world-class team. Hire the best people you can. Lesson number 2, to be an effective leader, you have to have the ability to provide a vision. You need to think about the future, where you want your company to go. You need to develop a business plan, and you need to understand how to execute on that business plan. Lesson number 3, always ask questions if you don't understand something. Lack of knowledge is not an excuse when it comes to making mistakes, especially when you had an opportunity to ask questions. And I was at a Rotary event on Wednesday when I spoke, and 15 feet from the podium was one of my top 3 attorneys that keeps me out of trouble when I don't ask enough questions. Now, lesson 1, 2, and 3, you won't find in Harrisburg very often. In fact, I really haven't found it at all. So my business lessons are working very interesting in Harrisburg. My business enterprises are where they are today because at all of my companies, we all watch every penny that comes in and every penny that goes out. In fact, folks, this is a putty knife, okay? And I know that all across America, business owners are getting up every single day, scraping pennies off the floor to make money. Maybe you find a penny, you find a nickel, you find a dime. If you're lucky, you might find a quarter. I've never found a dollar. But I'll tell you, pennies start adding up, nickels and dimes and quarters. This is the putty knife concept. And I'm going to tell you something, Harrisburg doesn't know what a putty knife is. Okay? So let's talk politics. I've been involved in politics since the early 80s. The waste industry is highly regulated, which is why I originally got involved in politics. As I became more and more involved in local and state politics, I had people knocking on my door asking for campaign contributions. Year after year, the same people would come asking for money, but fiscal reforms weren't being passed in Harrisburg, and regulations on my business kept increasing and just kept piling on. I started to ask people that were coming by for contributions, candidates, what they had accomplished over the last several years since they had stopped by last asking for a contribution. And you know, something weird happens when you start asking questions, especially in politics. People start getting defensive. They don't want to give you answers because they don't want to be the ones held accountable for those answers. So, you know, I was fed up. I made a decision not to sit on the sidelines anymore. I had seen how bad public policy can hurt small businesses, and actually it's choking small businesses and our economy, so I chose to run for public office. As I stated earlier, when I ran a write-in campaign for the Pennsylvania State Senate seat, left vacant by my predecessor, and I won. Outside sources were trying to keep me out of the race. I wasn't the Republican establishment's hand-picked candidate. A nasty attack campaign was waged against me in an attempt to smear my reputation. Despite the negativity from my opponent's campaign, on March 18, 2014, 11,000 people came out on Election Day and wrote in my name. Voters of the 28th Senate District of York County sent a clear message by electing me as a write-in candidate. They were fed up of the typical lip service from career politicians. Voters on March 18th did something quite amazing. They sent a private sector business owner to Harrisburg instead of a career politician. As a matter of fact, they sent a garbage man with some trucks, and they expected him to clean up, and the trucks are standing by. The last 2 years have been a wild ride, and I can tell you that I've learned a lot in the private sector, but Harrisburg's a different animal. The learning curve has been very fast and very steep. Coming from the private sector where we make things happen every day, every single day, I knew full well that things were going to be bad. Within months, I assessed that things were 10 times worse than I imagined. Folks, let me be direct and honest. We all have massive financial issues in Pennsylvania that must be resolved quickly. Let me talk about the issues. Massive issue number one is the pension system. We have a $60 billion liability, and it is growing every single day. To think that someone sent a benchmark of a 7% annual return is just, they must have been on another planet. People over the last, really from 2008 to 2000, probably 12 or 13, were happy with 2 and 3% returns and the fact that they were able to preserve their capital. Many state employees are spiking overtime to get a larger pension payout based on a 3-year average of compensation before retirement. Mind-boggling to me is that over 1,000 people receive $100,000 per year in annual pension payments. The top 2 pension recipients are former public university administrators that receive $477,000 a year and $455,000 a year per year for the rest of their lives. Okay? It's sickening. Many agencies, massive issue number 2, many agencies are out of control. There is very little experienced, professional, and knowledgeable management in place. Most of these people have never, ever worked in the private sector for any period of time. And Penn Futures is not a private sector operation. And that's where a lot of the people in the Wolf administration have come from. Think about this for a second. If you had to do this in your company, complete turnover every 8 years or less with many agency secretaries and many senior managers is a ripe recipe for disaster. I use the term government gone wild, and trust me, it's gone wild in Harrisburg. The best example is the Department of Corrections. It is a 16,000 employee operation. Last year during Senate Appropriations hearings, Department of Corrections Secretary Wetzel stated that if corrections officers would work some additional overtime, there would not be a need for additional new hires. Well, despite that claim, and we have him on tape last year, and this year, when we had hearings, we learned that 400 new employees were hired in the Department of Corrections and that overtime went through the roof and has skyrocketed. This year, the Department of Corrections is looking for a $200 million increase in funding for the 16-17 budget, and $73 million of the $200 of that money will be used for pension obligations. Overtime is out of control at the facilities. A review of last year's overtime records revealed that 7 employees in the Department of Corrections made more than $100,000 a year, or last year, just in overtime. That didn't include their base salary. 130 employees made more than $50,000 in overtime. Nearly 1,000 employees made more than $25,000. More than 3,700 employees made more than $10,000 in overtime alone. And it's important to note that inmate population has decreased over the last 4 years. Massive issue number 3, benefit percentages are out of control. This is something very important in my company we watch. Private sector businesses focus on benefit costs. Based on a percentage of benefits to $1 a payroll, the private sector typically runs 50% or less for benefits. Many Pennsylvania state agencies have benefit costs at 75 to over 100% as a percentage to $1 a payroll. This is simply unsustainable. Rising out of control benefit costs, along with, and which are part of the pension benefit costs, are burying Pennsylvania taxpayers. Massive issue number 4, public school districts. There are 500 school districts across Pennsylvania, all with volunteer school boards. Contract negotiations by 500 volunteer school boards is another issue that we need to address in order to control costs. These school boards are negotiating wage, benefit, step pay increases with very sharp union representatives at the table without Harrisburg having any input in the process. We get the bill in Harrisburg, and it's your tax dollars that are being used to cover these costs. Another huge issue is that school boards have members of the board that are either former teachers, married to a teacher, or have children that are teachers. These are huge conflicts in my world. Massive issue number 5, unused sick, holiday, vacation, and personal time off not being used. And we are not accruing for this liability, and it's another large hidden problem. Last year, 2 Senate staffers received payouts for their unused time. One received a little over $112,000, and the other received a little over $100,000. The generous pensions that they'll receive, and one of the staffers had severance in addition. There are easily several thousand employees that have unused vacation, sick, and personal days. What's the total cost? If this isn't being showed on Pennsylvania's balance sheet, it's accounting fraud. If I went to the bank and borrowed money and didn't show another loan that I had or a liability, it's fraud. It's a federal offense. It's a felony. I serve on the Senate Appropriations Committee. The current mentality of our state agencies is very simple. When an agency comes in, for example, they're looking for $200 million. We received that last year. Or excuse me, they received $200 million last year, and this year they're looking for typically a minimum of 5%. 5% tends to be the rule or more. I am in favor of zero-based budgeting. You know, is zero-based budgeting really hard? No, it's not, because you might find it interesting that Exxon, a public company with almost $300 billion in revenue, does zero-based budgeting. I have a banker in York who used to work for Exxon. She's the one who told me that during a conversation, and we verified it. From February 22nd to March 8th, the 2016-17 budget hearings took place, and let me quickly run through some of the things that I learned. In 2014, there were 6,400 state employees who earned more than $100,000 a year. And in 2015, that number grew to 7,700 state employees, a 20% increase. Government is growing. The most shocking discovery, the state employee with the highest earnings in 2015 was a Westchester University swim coach who had earnings of $420,000 last year, okay? The Pennsylvania State Police have between 135 and 145 full-time personnel permanently assigned to casinos throughout the Commonwealth. The total cost without vehicles for this personnel detail is $28.5 million, almost $200,000 per person in casinos. Another disappointing discovery is to learn that the state police are being funded by fuel taxes. Every gallon of gasoline or diesel fuel that's pumped in Pennsylvania, 11.7 cents goes toward funding the state police. Currently, the state police receive $833 million in funding from fuel taxes, when in fact the state police should be funded from the general fund. This is a major detail that the legislature did not clean up when the transportation legislation was passed in November of 2013. Here's another really good example of waste and a lack of accountability. The state began the upgrade of a statewide radio system approximately 10 to 12 years ago, and the state police use this system. Here's the bad news. The total cost spent so far is approaching $1 billion, and the radio system does not work properly. For me, this is amazing. This is the second year that we've had conversations at appropriations meetings about this radio disaster. Now, here's a no-brainer, folks. At Penn Waste, we have a roll-off truck that travels to a glass processing facility north of Pittsburgh. Our truck has a $600 Motorola radio in it and can easily communicate with our dispatcher in York. Now, isn't that amazing? Okay? Folks, I'm telling you, you can't make this stuff up. The more questions I ask, the deeper the rabbit hole gets. People consistently ask me if I'm getting frustrated. My answer is always the same. I'm not getting frustrated. I'm getting more motivated. And for people that know me, I'm just getting ramped up. Owning a business is one of the largest risks you can take in life. Every experience in my professional life has prepared me for the challenges I now face in the Pennsylvania State Senate. Every day, my company goes up against two of the largest public companies, New York Stock Exchange companies in the United States, and we're winning the battle. I understand that a compromise is necessary for government to work effectively. I've made friends in the Senate and the House, both Republicans and Democrats, and some I knew before I got there. I've upset some people, so what? I'm not having any problem sleeping at night. I've spent the last 2 years getting to know people, building relationships, and learning their stories. Everybody has a story. And there are some good, genuine people in the legislature, but you got to learn their story, and you got to learn what makes them tick, and you got to learn how to work with them. But at the end of the day, I'm going to call it like I see it, and I'm not going to apologize if I hurt someone's feelings in the process, because I have a job to do. One of the worst excuses that I hear from my colleagues in the Senate on why they won't vote for necessary reforms is that the excuse, I need to vote my district. House and Senate members may represent a specific district, but they have to feel and should feel some responsibility to do what is right for all Pennsylvanians. I've seen it firsthand. I've seen a lot of waste, fraud, and abuse in the last 2 years, and I just told you about a small portion because it's only a small portion. Those are just 2 scoops of the bad stuff I've seen. We have 2 choices in Pennsylvania: either raise taxes or get Harrisburg under control. And when I come from the business sector, the private sector, you don't go out to your customers and raise prices when you don't have your house in order. So let's get our house in order. I'm standing here telling you that I cannot, in good conscience, vote for any budget that includes tax increases that doesn't address efficiencies, accountability, and controls on spending. I receive letters every day from taxpayers who are on fixed incomes and are leaving their homes because they can't afford their school taxes. You know, when I was growing up, everyone's dream was to own their own home, but that's changed because no taxpayer owns their home, the government owns your home. How is it fair that many people spend their entire lives working to pay off their home only to have to move because they can't afford their property taxes? How am I supposed to let that happen by voting for another tax increase when I know the money needed for education won't actually be used on the students? It's going to be used on teacher pensions and benefits, every single dollar. So the lie that is being told about it's going into the schools is a lie. Governor Wolf only wants to raise taxes. He has zero interest, and I know this firsthand. I met with him. He made a promise to me, and he broke his promise. Told me he would call me about this. He has zero interest in managing, directing, and holding people accountable. During Governor Wolf's campaign, did anybody see Governor Wolf on TV saying, folks, I'm going to have to raise your taxes? No, what we saw was Governor Wolf in a classroom with children and with the goofy duck sound, and it said, kids, there's $1 billion right under the floor. And you know what? That was the severance tax on the gas industry. If the severance tax was imposed today, it would only generate probably about $70 million. Okay, not $1 billion. So if anybody heard Governor Wolf on TV saying to people of Pennsylvania, I'm going to raise your taxes, he would have never gotten elected. I've been called an obstructionist for standing by my principles. And actually, I've run into a couple people in New York that are friends of the governor, and one guy said, I'm upset with you. I don't like what you're doing in Harrisburg. And I said, well, what's wrong? He said, you're an obstructionist. And this guy could pay it. He could easily pay more taxes because he's an orthodontist. Have you ever taken your kids to an orthodontist? Okay, they don't make $50,000 a year. Okay, so you know, if you recall at the beginning of my remarks, I talked about asking questions and holding people accountable. At the end of the day, I'm not unreasonable. I just want answers, and I just want to show you that this is the 2016-17 budget book. This is what our state government has become. And I'm telling you, under zero-based budgeting, this would be very different. We'd be throwing it in the trash, okay, and doing something different. But I'm going to tell you, everything that I see wrong in Harrisburg didn't happen yesterday. It's the result of 30 to 45 years of bad decisions and greedy career politicians taking care of themselves and their friends. Both political parties are to blame. It's time to clean up Harrisburg and clean up the mess and get Pennsylvania back on track. I'm willing to compromise when it's in the best interest of everyone, but right now, I say it again, raising taxes is not the answer. And listen, I have a sign in my office, and it says, align your expectations with reality. And I can tell you, after we've turned over every single rock in Pennsylvania, and we've determined that there's no more money under the rocks, then maybe we'll have a tax conversation. But I'm telling you, not a single rock has been turned over, and it's time to start. You know, I'm not the most polished guy in the room, but I'll tell you, I refuse to stop asking questions because I make people comfortable. Folks, I just want to be as diplomatic as I can when I say this. I told you, I have several businesses, and I'm really a garbage man. But I don't need this Senate job, and I don't need the money. I decline the pension, health benefits, and I don't collect per diems. And I use my Senate salary to pay for all travel, legal fees. In fact, my elections compliance attorney, Lawrence Tavis, is here, and Lawrence isn't cheap, okay? And but he's very, very good. You surround yourself with good people. And expenses, I pay for all my travel, legal fees, expenses associated with my job. If you come to my office, the water, coffee, everything you drink, I just paid for personally. It's just easier that way. And I can tell you, all these expenses exceed this great big salary that I get. My salary's $84,000, and after tax, it's $57,000. And trust me, it gets sucked up pretty fast. But you know what? I can walk into the Capitol every single day knowing that I'm not beholden to special interest or public sector unions. Folks, I'm going to just tell you this. I'll never be owned by anyone. I'm more concerned than ever about the future of Pennsylvania and this great country, where I was able to start a business at age 20. It's imperative that we get our family, friends, and neighbors involved in politics. Pennsylvania has the most liberal governor in the United States, and we have the most liberal president in United States history in the White House. This is my opinion. Barack Obama has set America back 30 years. Barack Obama has divided people in this country. Barack Obama has insulted successful people who have risked everything they own to start a business and employ people. Barack Obama believes that people should be ashamed of their success. And by the way, you didn't build your business, the government did. Now, I'm just curious, for about a 15-year period when I started my first waste company, was Barack Obama's alarm clock going off at 3 a.m. in the morning? I don't think so. Okay? It is my belief that on a national level, and again, this is my belief, that if we do not elect a Republican president, if either Hillary or Bernie get elected, that America's best days are behind us. Folks, this is fish or cut bait time. I was at an event at a high school in my Senate district, and this is what led me to that conclusion, and I'm very concerned. I was at a high school, my Senate district, this past Tuesday evening for dinner, where they bring in community leaders and people from the community. And the dinner conversation at our table led to a discussion by a senior student who interviewed 50 other students for their opinion about the upcoming presidential race. He did a video text interview of each student. He passed his phone around so everybody could look at it, and I quickly went through the 50 pictures of the students, and you would press on their face, pop up their text. At least 35 of the 50 students interviewed that said they liked Bernie Sanders. One student actually said, I like Bernie Sanders' idea of redistributing the wealth. And I'll tell you, folks, I almost fell off my chair. It wasn't a big chair. But I'm going to ask you to do two things. Take time to talk to the young people in your life, children, any young people you know, because there is no such thing as free this and free that. It just doesn't work. You may want to talk about your paycheck with your children or young people and talk to them about taxes, because if you make $500 a week, at the end of the day, you're going to bring home probably between $300 and $350 after all taxes are taken out, and you need to understand that. And if you own a business, and this is something that's very tough for friends of mine, if you own a business, talk to your employees. Please ask them to register to vote. We had a voter registration drive in our company. We were very successful. Ask them to become informed. And Fred touched on this. We need to get behind our Republican candidates and support them in the general election. There is no such thing as a perfect candidate. They don't exist. Whether it is financially supporting them or on the grassroots level, these candidates need your support. And as Fred touched on this, and this is somewhat personal for me, the worst thing, and I repeat, the worst thing that could happen to Pennsylvania this fall is to have Katie McGinney or Joe Sustak become our next United States Senator. Now, why is it personal? Well, I know Katie McGinney because she served on the board of a company that I have a very small interest on. She was on the board for 2 years, and I've been on for 6. I left when I joined the Senate. She came to 2 meetings of the 8 and teleconferenced the other 6, didn't bring any value to the board. I wouldn't trust Katie McGinney to watch my dog or your dog. In fact, I'd be afraid for your dog, let alone let Katie McGinney represent any of us or me in Washington. This is even where it gets better. Katie McGinney's been endorsed by President Obama, I think just 2 days ago, Vice President Joe Biden, Mr. Senator Bob Casey, okay? And every public sector union out there is endorsing Katie. And that should tell you something. And Joe Sustak, I had a personal encounter with Joe 6 years ago when he came to York and spoke at a Rotary event. He voted for Obamacare. He voted with Nancy Pelosi 97% of the time. And we voted that one time when let's vote and figure out what's in it. Well, that's exactly what he did. And he voted for every big-ticket Obama initiative while he was in Congress. I walked over in a Rotary meeting and handed him the 900-page Obama bill that he had signed. He said, "Sir, I've read it." I've run into staffers that said he never looked at it, okay? Pat Toomey needs to get reelected. As a country, and I'm going to say this emphatically, as a country, in Pennsylvania, we cannot afford to have Katie McGinney or Joe Sustak in D.C. Do I agree? Fred touched on this. Do I agree with every piece of legislation Pat Toomey has sponsored since being in office? No. But I'm involved in some legislation that some people don't like what I'm doing, and they don't support me. But you know what? I'm trying to do the right thing. Pat has been a very strong fiscal advocate for us in Washington, and we need to get him reelected. Senator Toomey has my support, and he needs your support to either beat Katie or Joe in the fall. Pat Toomey has to raise a tremendous amount of money. Katie McGinney, all she does is dials, whatever the number is for Ask Me, any of the unions, and she gets what she wants. And when you go out and raise $1 million, like Pat, let's say $1 million at a time, and you have $25 checks and $50 checks and $1,000 checks, and then there's a limit. But Katie gets to call the union, and they'll give her $1 million. So I'd like to close with this quote, and this is a quote that I found recently, and it is so true. America is a country that produces people who will cross the ocean to fight and die for our freedoms. And America also produces people who will not cross the street to vote. The future of our country rests in your hands. Everyone here plays a role in saving America. Thank you.